Western Conference together. And all the speakers we've heard already and will be for this coming evening and tomorrow. I think it's very important and crucial times, and I believe that we all agree on that. Not only for Georgia, and probably Georgia is the last thing we should be talking here about. I completely agree with you, all the problems and troubles and challenges of the world today, whether it's from ISIS or Russia or any other that we can give a long list here, should be seen as one full picture. Small components of one big problem that the world has today. And I cannot talk here without responding to some of the comments we've already heard here this morning, as I think that it's all interrelated. Again, all these threats, all the challenges, I want to put together once again, whether they are coming from north of Georgia or south of Georgia. And I think there is one common word unifying all of that, which is the strong leadership of the world. And I cannot agree more with Ambassador Walker when he said that stronger NATO gets, stronger NATO's response gets, is better for everybody, regardless of being members or not being members of NATO. And unfortunately, I think this is what is missing from today's world, strong voice from NATO and from European Union for that matter. What is missing in today's world is the positive agenda that we all want to see how NATO sees itself, how NATO sees the world in 5, 10, 20 years, rather than responding, creating all those plans, action plans for responding to threats and challenges that the world is facing today. It's the same for Russia. It's the same for the rest of the troubles that the world is facing. What we are missing, the main components will be a roadmap as seen, as drawn, positive roadmap from the NATO. So that's why probably today there is so much concentration as to Article 5 countries. That's why probably there is so much concern about internal security within the NATO membership. And that's why probably the Warsaw Summit is seen by many as a summit about the members more than about anything else. I think here is the dilemma, because I strongly believe, and we in this country strongly believe, that if NATO fails here in Georgia, it will fail in so many different directions. If NATO shows the weakness towards Russia and gives Russia the veto power, as it states every day clearly, Mr. Lavrov, Mr. Putin, everybody, you name it, from the Russian ruling elite, does not miss a chance, not stating that they do have a veto power and they do influence the decision-making in NATO. As soon as it is certified in Warsaw, I believe that lots of other forces and lots of other people out there in the world will start believing that if they push hard, then they can get away as well, and they can stop NATO as well, and they can scare them all as well, the same way as Russia did in case of Georgia or Ukraine for that matter. This is why some of the statements that Lithuanian Minister of Foreign Affairs, absolutely one of the biggest friends of Georgia, supporters of Georgian cause, were unacceptable for me, and I kind of waved head to him when he was speaking. Because sometimes, well, we know that it's a cynical world. We know it's not about the fairness. We know we accept it, we understand it. But it sounds not very nice here in Tbilisi when we are asked also, together with accepting is liking, to like it and to be happy about it. That's something that is beyond our ability. Again, we can accept it, but we are going to fight against it. And we are going to prove to the world that there is another reality, and we just don't take things for granted. I think it was Randy who said that if there is one country who deserves membership now, and it should have been done in Warsaw already, will be Montenegro. And as much as I support Montenegro's advance in Warsaw, because it does prove the fact that open door policy stays as open door and countries are actually walking in those open doors, I always have this question, what it is fundamentally so different between Montenegro and Georgia that makes Montenegro a country where less than 1/3 of the population supports NATO membership, more fit for membership than Georgia, with two-thirds support, approval rating for NATO, with all the commitment to this cause, not fit even for MAP, not to talk about the membership. And I think this is where these lines of cynicism are drawn in today's world. But again, this is kind of a challenge we accept, and obviously we are going to talk about lots of details and lots of issues during this conversation, but just for a starter, I wanted to show the mood that is driving this government today and that is driving me personally for these 4 months, and as long as I'll be in this job, to break all the walls that stand in front of us, to fight all the wars that are necessary in every corridors and rooms, and to get there, and to convince everybody that if there is anything in this world that should be happening in Warsaw, that will be enlargement. That will be the only proper answer from the NATO to the kind of challenge Russia is sending to the world today. Enlargement not only to Montenegro, but also to a country like Georgia. That long deserves it, that is ready for it, and is only waiting for that elephant to be out, to be kicked out of the room that is always there whenever the decisions are to be made about Georgia. So I will stop here, and again, looking forward for an engaging conversation on more specifics and more details of this issue.
But it will not be the end of your involvement during this discussion, because when I remember, that day in 2008, August 2008, that we received to Warsaw the information about the invasion of Russian troops to Georgia, and together with Minister Sikorski, we began interventions in Brussels, phone conversations, and we received news that unfortunately the Secretary General is on vacations on Shepherd Islands, and it will be difficult to reach him. We tried to find his deputy, and I had a chance to have a conversation with Claudio Bisogniero, who was at that time the Deputy Secretary General, and unfortunately we were refused to receive a confirmation that next day there will be a meeting of the ambassadors of the North Atlantic Council. It happened, of course. But it was on Tuesday, as far as I remember, not directly after our effort. But after that, there was a gradual involvement of NATO and particular members of the alliance to support your capabilities during last years here in Georgia. How would you, Madam Minister, describe, let's say, the outcome of this involvement, and to what extent you are satisfied with the current involvement of NATO countries in enhancing your security?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Many things have changed after 2008, and we've been recipients of so many different programs and support from our Western allies, actually since the end of the 90s. But there is an important difference to be made, is between support of Georgia as a country delivering its troops to Afghanistan, and support of Georgia that needs support here domestically on the ground. So if you put it in comparative terms, that yes, world has been extremely active, standing ready for supporting us by all possible means when it comes to our troops going to Afghanistan, which is serving our security interests at the end of the day, because we are proud of those 12,000 soldiers who went through this route and got all the experience and necessary skills. But at the same time, when it comes to defending our security locally and getting support domestically, then it gets less and less year after another. And this is probably one of the cynicisms of that world that I was talking about as well. For example, just probably the best example of that will be Georgia being on this mute trade embargo, arms trade embargo since 2008. And it was the first time this summer when we have signed the deal with French, when we actually got at least in one country, doors open. But since then, it did not serve as a triggering factor that all the other countries stand ready to offer the same kind of contributions. We don't really get that much. There are some, but not across the board of all NATO countries. So it also speaks for a lot of the problems that Georgia is still facing today. And when we talk about the security, that's exactly probably one and only defining issues for the policy that we are engaged in. Linas was saying here that we need to use all the leverage. And I don't really understand that. I don't accept that sentence, and I don't understand that sentence. I don't even know what it means that Minister was talking about. Because when making comparisons between Lithuania when it was entering NATO and Georgia today, I think that's where it gets fundamentally wrong. Because Lithuania, as far as I remember, did not have 6,000 regular troops on its ground of a Russian military power and another additional 6,000 in rotational terms, and did not have 20% of its territory occupied, and did not have every single morning waking up expecting for another act of aggression happening in his country. This is a completely different world. These are two completely different states on the one hand, and on the other hand, it's a completely different world, with war in Ukraine, occupation and active daily aggression in Georgia, than it was back then when Baltics were becoming members of European Union and NATO. Baltics, as it was rightly mentioned, were three fighting together, standing together, going for the same cause, and we are standing alone in this neighborhood, fighting for this cause and going for this cause. And it also makes a world of difference. Baltics had European Union member countries on its borders, we have none. There are lots of things that matter in today's world that make today's world completely different from the times that Mr. Minister was talking about. And obviously, when we are told, as Randy was saying, to be modest about, while talking about the NATO, I say out loudly, I'm not going to get modest. It's not an option for us, because now here we are talking about the survival of the state that has been shrinking since '94. Irakli Alasanya was saying here that that's the time when we knocked on NATO doors, and since that very moment when we knocked on NATO doors first time in '94, this country has been shrinking year after year. And I don't know where we will be after 2 years or 5 years or 10 years, what will be left of Georgia if things continue as they are today. That's why things need to be seen in as, I might sound very dramatic here, but things are extremely dramatic here. I cannot joke about these things, although I understand when you sit on a panel and talk to the audience, it's nice to make jokes, but I spare jokes for another time, because things are extremely dramatic, and this dramatism and this extremism that is shown by our northern neighbor needs to be addressed properly. And again, it's about, for us, it's absolutely existential issue, whether it's going to be today, this December, or next July on the summit, or summit after that, or ministerial after that. Every 6 months make a huge difference for Georgia. And it's not like, okay, let's wait for another 2 years, things might change, and you might go ahead with the plan. Yes, probably we will do. In 2 years, 4 years, 10 years, 100 years, well, Georgia survived all the centuries, all the enemies, all the fights, all the wars, and we are going to survive. But the issue and question is, what will be left of it? What will be the part of the country actually going on a membership track? So that's why, again, as tragic it might sound or as dramatic it might sound, that's the reality. And we all need to face this reality with very open eyes and with very clear vision of what's going to happen tomorrow in this country, in Ukraine, in Estonia, in any other country for that matter, where Russia does have its claims of the influence to be of its influence to be transferred to. So that's the security reality in here on the ground.
To focus for a while, only for a while, on the European Union, because we concentrated on your assessment and let's say, the way forward to the NATO summit. But to speak about European Union's involvement here in Georgia, what would be your assessment of the current shape of relationship between the EU and Georgia? I still keep in mind the enthusiastic reaction of Georgian society last year during the June Batumi Security Conference, when you celebrated with our participation the association agreement with the European Union. How would you assess, this year behind us and the way forward? What would be also your expectations concerning the involvement of the European Union, partially in the sphere of security and broadly in integration between the EU and Georgia?
Well, I'm kind of more optimistic about the European Union and this formula of more Georgia to some here and more something to Georgia will more apply to EU than to NATO at this moment of time, I guess. There is more European Union in Georgia. You can see it on a daily basis, both with getting strength for the CFTA and actual use of it, and in terms of visa liberalization. I very much hope that by the end of the year we will get positive response. The visit of the President was in July, was very optimistic. He was very straightforward in a Polish way, very enthusiastic about Georgia getting closer and actually gaining strength and getting actual tools and instruments for joining NATO and for joining European Union, and I do hope and believe that December this year will mark this advance in a practical way as well, and it will go beyond the statements, and we will actually get the ticket our citizens will get the ticket to the European Union. And as I've said, the CFTA is one of a huge tool that is still there to be fully implemented and to be fully workable for the citizens of Georgia. The government is trying its best in this direction, but again, all the assistance we are getting from member countries as well as from the Commission is extremely useful and important in this direction. I would say that security-wise, we can also have more support and more instruments used from Brussels, from the European Union perspective, but I guess that on that, everybody's eyes are turned into different offices in the same city called NATO, and both European Union and member countries are looking forward for the December ministerial and its decisions, its mood, and after that we can have more structural approach to this issue from the European Union side as well. But at this moment, you don't have that much of a talk from in that direction.
As we know, here the European Union faces a variety of challenges, not only those very visible, I mean the flow of migrants to the territory of the EU countries, especially to the southern flank of the EU, but also its own problems with some policies of the EU, and one of them is the security and defense policy of the EU that according to my assessment, is still unfortunately in crisis. This is not the first crisis of CSDP, this is the second crisis during last 11 years of the history of this policy, but still we lack the political will to go ahead and to use those instruments that could be used in such situations that we witness in the southern or eastern flank. For example, permanent structured cooperation of the battle groups, for example, the clause of mutual assistance. So this is the current posture of the EU concerning Georgia and your region is also one of the effects of the current crisis, internal crisis of CSDP. From our point of view, the reaction of NATO on Russian threat that emerged so visibly in 2008 and mainly 2 years ago according to the invasion and annexation of Crimea and an invasion of Russian troops into eastern Ukraine, the reaction for members of the alliance was clear and satisfying. When involvement of NATO and support of NATO to Ukraine itself, and before that here in Georgia itself, was not satisfying. So this is this difference even from the position point of view of some elites in some member states of the alliance. But I would like to turn for a while at least to the audience and to enable our colleagues to ask you, Madam Minister, several questions.
Sure.
Who would like to do that? Please, the floor is yours.
Mika ცოტა ახლოს რა არის.
I'm the University. With permission, I have a question related to, of course, integration of Georgia to the European structures. From one side, we know that according to the article number 10 of the NATO Charter, a European state becomes a member of NATO if this country expresses readiness to make some contribution to the Euro-Atlantic security. And by the involvement of Georgia in the different peacekeeping cooperation together with NATO member countries, Central Asia, and Central Africa, etc. Georgia proved, of course, readiness to be the contributor. But from the other side, we know that in 1995, from within the NATO, it was adopted the document under the NATO according to which any country which would like to become any potentially member of NATO should satisfy different political, security, military, economic, etc., standards, and so on. So, according to those documents, in your point of view, what are the main strengths and weaknesses of Georgia towards Euro-Atlantic integration? You mentioned about the problem of the territorial integrity, but together with this problem, what are the obstacles that are here and what are the strengths? Thank you very much.
Please, the floor is yours. We do not hear.
I'm an MP with the Parliamentary Minority of Canada is my name. Madam Minister, you said many things that I would certainly subscribe to. The President in his intervention mentioned the worrying increase of NATO skeptic or pro-Russian attitudes. And of course, one reason for such increase is the Russian soft power effort that is much talked about in Western capitals these days, which is also present in Georgia. How do you explain recent evidence that some of the pro-Russian media organizations in this country are receiving money from the government? Also, how do you reconcile with openly pro-Russian political leaders as leaders of the Georgian Dream Coalition? And finally, I have to repeat myself, do you share the Prime Minister's statement that Ukraine should not be allowed to acquire defensive weapons? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe now the time for Madam Minister. Works?
Yeah, I think, yeah, it does. Well, talking about the main strengths and weaknesses of Georgia on this Euro-Atlantic integration process, it's a whole new theme of the whole conference, I guess. There are so many different aspects to it, starting from economics, finishing with the strength of army. I don't even know how to respond, but I think that there are two major strengths that Georgia is proud of and should be evaluated on the basis of its own merits when we talk about either membership or making steps towards membership. One that will be our contribution to the world security, and Georgians being loyal, strong, reliable partners for all these years do make us reliable partners in any other direction, not just for Iraq or Afghanistan or any other commitment of that kind. And the other one will be this absolutely, regardless of the fact, I agree with Georgi, of growing skepticism in Georgia, and yes, Russia making its moves with the soft power. I'll talk about this a little later. Regardless of that, the strong commitment of the Georgian people for all these 25 years, very clearly shown fight for the European cause. General Hodges was saying here that Ukraine is probably the only country where people are dying with the EU flags in their hands. As much as I like that statement, I would argue with that because Georgians also were dying with the EU flags in their hands for all these 25 years. And they fought not just one war in 2008 August, but they fought lots of wars throughout these 25 years of independence exactly for this cause and exactly for this purpose. Those two things probably make us count for the strongest points for us and make us the country that should be taken for granted already after all these years when there is a discussion about our perspective to either NATO or European Union. As for the other questions, well, I do agree about the increase of the Russian soft power. This is reality, unfortunately. It's reality not just in Georgia, but in lots of European Union member countries as well, and you see it across the board. You see influence of Russian media, you see influence of Russian money, NGOs, you name it. Lots of different variations depending on the countries. And it is here as well. Fortunately, those voices are pretty marginal so far in Georgia, and if there is anything, I have a full confidence that will be my nation, and I do have full confidence that this country will never turn to that path again. And actually, Russia is probably the biggest ally on that, having their tanks rolling in and out all the time, or their helicopters flying in and out on the territory of Georgia does not make them the most friendly and most lovable nation out of all to go on that direction ever again. And as for the last question, I've answered it many times for you, and I'm going to answer it again. No, I don't agree. I've been advocating in many countries, in many places, in many conferences for exactly the different cause, and that's no news for you because you've heard it so many times from me already. So I don't change my positions by changing the chairs where I sit, being member of parliament or minister of defense for that matter.
Thank you. We had only half an hour granted by the organizers for this conversation. Do you have, colleagues, any other questions concerning those issues that we described during this discussion? If not, thank you very much for this conversation, and thank you very much, Madam Minister, for your participation.
Thank you. Thank you, Bogdan, and thank you, Madam Minister. Thank you, both of you. We're going to make a slight adjustment in the program. Instead of moving to our next panel, we're going to go to the coffee break now, so everyone can get out of the sun and take a little bit of a breather. And we'll come back in half an hour or so when we hope the sun will have created a bit more shade in the space here. So we'll take a coffee break now. Thank you.
See you later. Asante Yerusami. Žygimantas Pavilionis, is a Lithuanian ambassador at large for Eastern Partnership. Then David Sikharulidze, president of Atlantic Council currently, but previous functions in the government as well. But last but not least, Ursula Palash from a European External Action Service. The topic of our panel is threats and how are we going to confront them. And I would like you to try to be very concrete. Because so far the debate was as if the membership or the prospective membership is a solution to all threats. And I would like you to address the concrete questions, how we can actually address the threats we are facing. We heard that, and I was trying to point out, that EU and NATO 2015 is not the same as it was 2004 and 1999. The neighborhood is becoming extensively unfriendly. The Arab Spring hasn't been mentioned, but the lessons from Libya and Syria have been actually taken seriously in Brussels. Is no longer the same kind of appetite for intervention there. And interestingly enough, the notion of ambiguity and call for clarity has been mentioned several times this morning. But probably we are not getting any more clarity because the spoiler in the East, which is Russia clearly, is not seen as a spoiler in the Middle East. I mean, the Russian actions in Syria are not necessarily taken by everybody as a spoiling effect. And maybe Russia is a welcome ally in the alliance against ISIS, Daesh. So we'll probably not get into times of clarity. We will have more and more ambiguity. So how would you, I would pose to every one of you a question. What is in your view the biggest threat? And you can name a territorial direction, but also you can mention cyber. I expect Yuri to mention cyber probably later. And how you would see we together can address and confront these threats. I start from Ursula because she is now working on the document EU is preparing, the global strategy. And if you would like to mention just 2 or 3 issues. I understand it will be a comprehensive document, but would you mention what comes out of it? And then we'll move closer to me.
Thank you a lot, and I would like to thank for the organizers for inviting me to Tbilisi. I do not see them all, but I try my best, and I try to also resist the stress, being also here for gender balance, I understand, so I will resist the sun as well. So thank you for inviting me and for the topic. Clearly, as was mentioned already by Minister Klich, the EU is now under stress and has encountered several challenges and threats at the same time. There is a perception in the EU that the environment has changed dramatically since 2003, when we developed the security strategy. In 2003, we said that Europe was in a time of peace and prosperity, unprecedented. But since then, we witness that this might be perhaps only a small interlude in the history, where we thought that the beginning of the 20th century is really a closed chapter, and now we live in only peaceful times. Because of that assumption and seeing the threats, and they were named today, we can start with just to name a few: cyber, but you have also climate change challenges with direct security implications. You have energy security challenges. We have Asia. There are quite important tensions which might influence also Europe's security because of the trade globalization. Or let's think about the growing number of Afghan refugees and consider that it influences Europe also directly, and it's 600 kilometers, 6,000 kilometers to come to Europe. Then moving further to the south, sub-Saharan Africa, which is a broader neighborhood of the EU, has to cope with persistent crisis and conflict, mostly intrastate, and terrorism spreading. And let me, by the way, here congratulate and commend the Georgian government of committing peace troops to the Central African Republic peacekeeping mission. That was very highly valued. But doubtlessly, the neighborhood is the biggest challenge, the East and the South. And that is why the decision was taken to start working on a new strategy, which would in the end replace the 2003 security strategy, but would be most probably broader, as the working title suggests, and the working title is Global Strategy on Foreign and Security Policy. To prepare the ground, the High Representative presented to the European Council in June this year an assessment of the global environment, and in this assessment it called for a more joined-up approach, which is not a novelty, but the nature of threats, which are much more dispersed, call really for a joined-up approach. Just look for the fragile states combined with conflict and migration. You cannot deal with them separately. You have to have a joined-up approach here. Then an old story of the common security and defense policy plays a role in the assessment. And here, the direction I would think of is to, and is also mentioned there, is going for partnerships in the world with other organizations. And here, the UN for peacekeeping operations, NATO, a crucial partner, also OSCE and the African Union. Now, the threats I mentioned already, they are all in the assessment. The neighborhood is being mentioned, the hybrid nature of wars today, and here, as the General mentioned, its area today, it concerns both what we are witnessing in Ukraine, but also what we have to encounter when we deal with ISIS. This is the propaganda machinery which tries to influence the narrative and to gain power position via this narrative. And just a side remark, it's not that hybrid, and here are several defense ministers, I hope they could agree, it's nothing new. In fact, it's just a new version of an old special operations, and we had it in Poland in 1939 with special SS provocation in Gleiwitz, where German soldiers were posed for Polish soldiers and staged an attack, which was a propaganda preparation for the invasion. Or the Messner book from 1960, a former White Army Russian officer who wrote in 1960 that the future of the Third War will be hybrid. So it's not that new, it's just that we are, I think, discovering this again, and the EU is started working on a comprehensive answer to this threat. By the end of this year, we aim at having a document which would go into more details, and the basic assumption is that we have to first to acknowledge, because this hybrid basis on non-recognition, of not seeing what's happening. So first it's to have this acknowledgement, awareness raising, and then secondly resistance for the EU member states, but also for our partners. So looking from that perspective, from the EU bubble, I'm coming from to the east, so to the Eastern Partnership countries, we think that the best way is to strengthen the statehood, to make the countries more resistant and resilient, and association agreements to those who are interested should be further deepened and implemented, because the success of the states is, I think, the best recipe for getting resilience. With regard to Russia, there is I think a broad consensus that we have to stay firm as long as the conflict over Ukraine is not solved peacefully and the Minsk agreements are not being implemented. At the same time, looking forward to the longer perspective, we are convinced that we have to engage and to look for a relationship which is stabilized and sustainable, and we obviously we were as EU we were happy that Russia played a constructive role in the Iran nuclear talks. Admittedly, there are not numerous examples of a good cooperation with Russia, but this is a recent one and it should to be mentioned here. So summarizing, I would say that the EU understands that we are living again in interesting times, and 25 years might be also might possibly be only an interlude in the history, and we will try to stick together despite all the well-known deficiencies of the European machinery, tensions and long procedures. I'm personally convinced that we will face these threats, and we will help also our friends and partners in the world who, with us, stand on the side of the liberal and democratic order.
Thank you. It seems that everything starts at home. I mean, as we will be as resilient as our institutions will be efficient, and our global role starts in our neighborhood. If we will not succeed in stabilizing the neighborhood, how credible we could be as a Europe in the global scale. Žygimantas, I would like to ask you how you view this in the Eastern dimension. How successful are we in stabilizing institutions and statehood in Eastern neighborhood? We're definitely not too much success in the Mediterranean and the Middle East, but do we have success stories in the Eastern Partnership, and how it will be actually reflected in the new version of the Eastern Partnership 2.0?
Okay, thank you so much. Well, I will maybe start answering to your first question. What are the biggest threats? And being a good Catholic, I would start with the statement that the biggest threat is actually ourselves, our hearts and minds. And I also, echoing the Defense Minister of Georgia, I don't think that we are so different if we speak the essence. And I will start with that essence. I think the biggest threat is is really what we think about freedom and democracy. Are we really sincere when we say that we are for freedom and democracy, including in EU, where counting our development assistance, we spend for democracy and freedom just maybe 1 or 2% of our big, huge development money, including in Washington, where when I was working for 5 years, I was trying to make and push Americans to think democracy and freedom. And with some successes I did it, but it was just partial success. So my question to all my American friends, do you still share your American dream? Do you still fight for your constitutional values? In a way, we fight here in the East and we die for them. And if you do it seriously. And then if you declare it that you do, then we come to different instruments that we could, of course, employ. And paraphrasing my foreign minister, actually, yes, we shouldn't complain too much. We have everything in our hands, hearts, and souls. We just do not make it. And I think this is a deliberate choice, that we do not fight for freedoms, democracies, or human dignities. That is the basic of our own societies. This is the first question that, first of all, Americans should answer in Washington, maybe before 2016 including. Then if we answer that question, then we go to enlargement, I would agree, because if you believe your values, you have to defend and promote it. How do we defend values? We push our agendas, and we push enlargement, and we push EU and NATO, because we believe this is the right thing to do. Look to the Baltics. We are the most successful transformation example. President Obama was saying in 2003, so if we are so successful, please, repeat those successes, because we inspire others with our successes, I agree. But the signal that we sent in Bucharest and that we might repeat in Warsaw, for me, if I'm Mr. Putin, means that we are not taking care about those countries who try to transform according to our values. And I think that would be a big mistake if we make it. It's not only enlargement, it's all other signals. We in the Baltics, we are very happy with those new NATO centers we have, but we fight also for NATO bases and battalion-sized presence, because if we say you are serious enough, show it on the ground. Because Putin do not believe words, he believes deeds. And he is actually laughing at us because he is changing that words through deeds, first of all. It's also about Ukraine. Yes, it's about defensive assistance to Ukraine, because if you are serious enough in defending those values, so help them defend it themselves. Then we go to the part where I call promoting the values. Yes, it is about restoring our information or truth-telling infrastructure, like Appelbaum was calling it. When Speaker Boehner was in Lithuania, in every meeting he was asking, so what shall we do in countering the Putin's propaganda? All political leaders from right to left said, do the same you did in the Cold War. It worked. My father was listening to it, everybody was doing it, and we revolted. We revolted for American dream, for the dream you have, for your constitutional values. So do it seriously. You have all possible instruments. We have money, we have brains, we transformed the Soviet machine in a way it's working. So you just please do it. And then I turn to last two things, economic mostly, energy and trade. Well, when I was living and working in America, I was touring a lot of states, and I saw a lot of wells closed because the price is so low in Pennsylvania and Louisiana, and they would love to export LNGs. And we are the only in the Baltics that has LNG terminal. It's called Independence. And you know what? I was going to those American companies and asking them for contracts. They are all, sold out till 24, because you have big competition. China, Korea, Japan, everybody is competing for very cheap LNG. We will have first cargoes by the end of this year. Maybe. They might go to Lithuania from Cheniere. But why only Cheniere? You have a lot of other companies waiting for license. The same about oil. why do you have that strange oil ban? Is it socialism or what? You know, I believe America should be American energy as well. So, you know, I learned about free market economy that is usually quite effective in destroying the autocracy, so do it in energy, please. So if we create the global gas market, and if Americans are in oil market, we don't have to pay political prices anymore for energy resources. And when we introduced our LNG terminal, immediately price dropped. You know, it was the biggest drop in the world, 25 or 30%. Russians react if you really push freedom. And lastly, on trade, you know, I was in Congress when President Obama announced the TTIP. I was so happy with our European colleagues. I thought this is wonderful, finally, because we are the babies of free trade. When we concluded association treaty and free trade was implemented, first in Estonia, because you've been a bit wiser than us, with some transitional periods in Lithuania, my economy was growing 10-12% GDP. That was crazy. We picked up, we created the miracle. So free trade transforms it all, killing the Soviet cancers and Russian cancers, So it will be very powerful in Georgia, but we can do the same. I was expecting TTIP to be concluded before midterm elections. It didn't happen. Where is the power? Where is the steam? Where is a political will from both sides to do it? If you don't, you are losing the time already. Russians are buying the mines. You have millions protesting, and they are doing it for the good reason. To summarize everything, well, we can do a lot. We have everything on our hands, you know, but we are not doing it. So please start asking questions why you are not doing it. And if you want to do it, we can create wonderful, effective, long-term strategies and push those autocrats back. And I will finish with a maybe a too radical statement, but I remember that evening so well. It was the last evening when I saw Mark Palmer in my embassy before he passed out, who wrote the Westminster speech for Reagan. And his last toast was Zhigis and freedom fighters' friends. Some of them are sitting here. Let's fight for the world of community of values. And let's fight for the world where autocracies will be simply banned by international law. I believe that we can do it. And why should we be shy about that? Why shouldn't we really invest into that? I heard some rumor that the United States will share the community of democracy. So are you serious, America? I will finish here.
Well, thank you for bringing us back to basics. David, do you have enough belief in these values defending freedom and sovereignty here in Georgia accumulated? And where do you see your friends and allies in this belief? Because, I mean, as we've heard, this kind of belief seems like eroding, even in some bastions of the free world. So where do you see them, and do you have it enough? I guess this is a meeting of those who believe in that, so let's be frank about it.
Good. Thank you, Yuri. And of course, that I hope that the time of denial is over. And then we realize that we are in the middle of what some call the hybrid war, some asymmetrical war, but we can see all components, especially the frontline states, see all components of this war, starting from the hard component, like the direct military invasion or the threat of using force, or the penetration of special services into the state institutions, to economy, trade, finances, as well as the soft power. So we have this huge the propaganda war waged against the frontline states, with the immediate goal of undermining the statehood and the institutions of these states. But it's only immediate goal. The ultimate goal of it is to keep Europe in a state of permanent crisis and pressure, so that Russia can pursue its influence further and pushing over time. As Zygmunt has said, that also I want to bring the Bible here, as Ecclesiastes says, nothing is new under the sun. So this is not the new strategy. What Russia is doing, that they have been doing this since very beginning of the Soviet Union, probably with a certain adjustments with regard of ideology or maybe the better use of finances and businesses, which was not the case during the Soviet Union. But also, I mean, that is not nothing new. And I technically agree that, well, people, my friends are getting irritated when we are bringing up the Cold War stuff. But what this Cold War winning strategy was all about, it was all about having one holistic and coherent strategy how to not only counter, but the rollback the totalitarian state. So what we see today, we see total absence of unified strategy from what we call the free world. And this is one of those enablers of this hybrid war, and then that makes the fighting much more difficult. But I'm not really the supporter of, I mean, I don't think that the only thing Georgia should do is the complaint, or Ukraine should do the complaint. I mean, we will leave these complaints to our friends, and then I know that there are a lot of people who truly believes in a Europe whole, free and at peace, and then they will push for the renewed commitment by United States and the European Union for the Europe whole, free and at peace. But there are a lot of things we and Ukrainians should do internally. And first of all, and then the most important is to building the national consensus around our values. That means that the putting aside the partisan or personal hatred or this unacceptance of each other, which we see, and then sometimes it prevails, and it is one of the biggest enabler of the Russian hybrid war in Georgia, or the success of or the relative success of the propaganda war in Georgia. We have to focus more heavily on the strengthening of our institutions. But even though the consensus with regard of the building, national consensus building, requires the efforts from all sides, but the government has very special responsibilities. The government and the ruling party has the really responsibility on they should prove that the consensus and the Western choice and the democratization choice is really true priority, and the bigger priority than personal or the partisan rivalries. And at the end, I mean, if we have to use one word to characterize the situation, all the situation in our part of the world, or in frontline states, it's uncertainty. Uncertainty, and then what encourages Russia to pursue the hybrid war is the indecisiveness and absence of the strategy with regard of the future or the vision for the future. I remember the words, they are attributed to one of the former German chancellors, that if you have vision, go see doctor. But I disagree. Actually, nothing important has ever been accomplished without the vision. So this is the uncertainty basically is created by absence of the vision for future, and how the free world unified sees the future. With well, U.S. and EU are more inward-looking now, and then everybody keeps repeating it. While U.S., the new administration left the gap, a little bit small gap in Europe that has not been filled. Then there is the Georgian proverb, if I'm translating it correctly, that unattended church will be filled up by devil. So that's really one of the major problems now we are facing here. But still, I mean, let me finish by saying that on the first place, we should stop complaining and then do our homework, what has to be done here. So to take arguments or the diminished arguments of those who are against Georgia's NATO and EU membership, and strengthen arguments of those friends who are supporting, pushing, and encouraging the vision for Europe, whole, free, and net peace.
We should probably stop complaining about the deficit of leadership, which is a constant, complaint, and what can be done in the absence of leadership, which is evident now. In my view, this is sticking to the commitments, to existing commitments. If you don't have alternative vision, you have commitments, and you just have to stick to the existing commitments, and then maybe the leaders will come to show other directions. Stefano, how you view all this? We've heard for the first time TTIP. I'm grateful that you mentioned that dimension. We've heard about some basic values related to that, and we've heard that there's nothing new on the sun. So what's your take on that?
Well, there's never anything new under the sun, especially when the sun sets down. Let me go back to the first sentence by Ursula. So the EU is under stress. And also to question a little bit your point, which is very, not your point, it's common language, lack of leadership. We are under stress. The EU is under stress, NATO is under stress, Georgia is under stress, Italy, Germany, we're all under stress. Just think about what Europe has seen in the last 18 months. 18 months. An annexation followed by war in the midst of Europe. Banks closed for 3 weeks in a EU OECD country, and now tens of thousands marching, walking through Europe, something Europe had not seen since the Second World War. Europe, and when I say Europe, the West, the West, NATO has responded. Maybe it lacks a grand strategy, but it has responded. We have unified sanctions against Russia to a way that nobody would have thought it possible. Certainly Putin did not expect it. Somehow the Greek debt crisis has been maybe patched up, but certainly has been dealt with. And now we are responding to the refugee crisis. So the topic of our panel is security threats to Europe. Security, to me, nowadays, looks very much like real estate. It's all about location, location, location. Your security perception depends on where you are. If I concentrate on the sort of more conventional security threats, forget me, because also I'm not an expert on cyber, on the effects of climate change, etc. I see 3 major security threats to international peace and security. One is the risk of a major war in Asia, in the Asia Pacific. Not just the usual Pakistani-India border war. The second is Russian vision of the neighborhood, or you want to call it the aftershocks of the end of the Soviet Union. And the third is the multiple threats coming from the Great Middle East, encompassing the area which goes from Mauritania to Afghanistan. And Europe finds itself at the junction of 2 of the 3. Middle East, or South, if you wish, and Russia. The major problem, you asked us, which is, I wish we had the answer, how we should respond to threats. Let me try just to throw some bones in the arena. The first point would be we Europeans, we should stop bickering about whether the South or the East takes precedence. Either we recognize the threat which is felt by the other, or the idea of a common security, which was that was the basis at NATO, is finished. Middle East or South in general. I think time has come. Obviously, we have to take care of the refugees. Fences, walls will not work. They will be bypassed. In this very place, we should know that curtains do not work. But we should go after what at some point we'll call the root causes. And the root cause is very clear: failed states in that region. What is happening now has a name: Syria. A war which has been going on for years. We cannot have pieces of land, huge pieces of land. ISIS controls an area which is inhabited by 6 million people, where there's no responsible government. And if, obviously, the appetite for intervention is nowhere there, but we have to work with states, even with unsavory regimes, to restore some sort of order in that part of the world. We come to our neighborhood, especially here. I think we need a mix of what I call the 2 Ds. One is deterrence or defense, and the other is dialogue. And NATO is doing that. NATO is doing a number of measures on defense. I mean, in that respect, yes, let's go back to what we did in the Cold War. We created a situation where the other side should not have a thing about doing it. But at the same time, we did engage, at the time, the Soviets. I really see no reason why we talked to the Soviets in the midst of the Cold War, when we had 10,000 of nuclear warheads pointed to each other, and we cannot engage them now also to test their willingness or not about European security. I'm not talking about grand strategies or a big measure, but something like there is a recent call to NATO-Russia Council to discuss risk of conflict in Europe and measures to avoid military confrontation. This is something that does not involve any sort of appeasement, and we should do it. Part of the reason we find ourselves in this situation, I think, is that because we let, certainly by Russian initiative, but disintegrate the collective network security that we built across Europe, especially with CFE. If CFE had been in place, probably what happened in Crimea and Ukraine would have been possible. Step by step, we have to go back in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefano. It leads me to a question to Yuri. You served in Moscow, didn't you? What's your view as an Estonian? Is it realistic that we can deter Russia from doing some things which clearly, break the international system and are against our interest, and at the same time engage Russia to have a dual track with Russia? Is it realistic to have this kind of approach? This is not acceptable, and let's do something to avoid things which are detrimental to our common interest. Is it realistic, or should we wait for a new momentum for that?
Well, I think it's realistic theoretically. In practical terms, it is hard for me to imagine how to do it. To be honest, when I went to Russia, I was quite skeptical of the argument that it is all about Putin. And I was very keen on understanding the situation as if Russia would have this stereotypic approach to imperial sort of tools around its perimeter. But being in Russia made me see more clearly that present Russia is all about Putin and a small group around him, about the regime. And the main fear of the regime is what Putin calls colored revolutions. He has designed a whole list of measures which he uses to fight that revolution or potential revolution. both inside the country, but also around the perimeter. He clearly wants to create a cordon sanitaire around Russia. The territory around Russia can never, so that in his view, such a territory around Russia could never ignite a people's revolution in Russia. And that is what motivates, I believe, very much his action. We're not responsible for President Putin being there. I mean, it is the responsibility of Russian people, however you cut it. But we have enabled Putin to operate in the environment which has been passive, if you will, or disinterested of the region around Russia, so that he believes that the easiest, cheapest, and the less controversial way to strengthen his regime is by international adventures. Basically, we have made that, paradoxically, look to him as the easiest, cheapest option. And I think that is very bad. And we have to raise our game. We have to come back to the vision of Europe, whole and free. We have to engage with him if he wants a sort of intellectual fight. He also wants a real fight, but if he wants an intellectual fight, he has already taken this intellectual space, if you will, with a very detailed ideological agenda. And essentially, the saddest thing is we have accepted large pieces of his agenda. For instance, the idea that democracy is, well, it's equal to other systems of government. And basically, it's fair enough that one country wants a more authoritarian type of government, the other country, the other nation wants a democratic approach. We shouldn't accept that. I think we should return to the thinking of Europe whole and free and at peace, and we should emphasize that as part of that policy, we will protect not only democratic countries, but we will protect democratic ideas. We won't allow the moral relativism. Often you can do it even only with rhetoric, although it would be good if such a program would have some concrete measures of implementation to make it absolutely clear to Putin that we mean business. I mean, we have missed some of the minutest possibilities, like, for instance, giving Ukraine certain set of defensive arms. I mean, I don't know whether it would have helped in battlefield, but it would have certainly been a message that we take our job seriously. The reason why I mean, we can argue, the military can argue whether the Mistrals would have actually made military difference. There are various reasons of saying they probably wouldn't have actually. But the fact that they were not given to Russia were a clear part of that agenda which shows, where we can show that we are really serious, that we are able to make concrete decisions to make our point. Sometimes people are saying, well, but you know, this hampers dialogue, Russians might get offended. Let's be honest about it. President Putin is surprised that we do not use the assets in our disposal. He would never do that. He uses the smallest assets in his sort of toolbox. So we should really not be worried about the sensitivities of one or the other ex-KGB officer. They can take it. We shouldn't worry about that. We should worry about the fact that our behavior is interpreted in Moscow as a weakness. And weakness, of course, tempts aggression. That's the easiest way to help those who want to have aggressive imperialist policy. And finally, let's be honest about it. This agenda, the agenda of Europe whole, free and at peace, cannot be revived without US leadership. I mean, that will simply not happen. We are going face to face with a former superpower who is still a really powerful country. The European Union countries, regardless of any values, are not ready to do that if there is no coherent leading force in that game. Then the differences between EU countries can be ironed over. I recall that when, for instance, Estonia was stating to the European Union, which was quite a controversial decision in the European Union of that day, Dick Holbrooke, who was then Assistant Secretary for Europe, led personal talks with various European leaders, making the claim how EU membership is important for the future European unity. I don't see any reasons why the US couldn't have the same dialogue with European countries today. I think if Americans would come tomorrow to Europe and start this dialogue, nobody would say, the Americans are coming again. They are sort of stepping over the EU sovereign rights, etc., etc. The issues are so difficult that people really wait the Americans to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Clear message. We have time for a couple of questions, so please use the microphones in the row and introduce yourself. Ideally, tell to whom you address the question. Please.
I'm a monitor, which really I represent Apollonia. This is my first question. My question goes to Mr. Pavlianis, and if anybody will be willing to answer my question, I would be honored. The thing is that the Georgian government came when promised to normalize relations with Russia, but what we see now is everything is abnormal. Russia is waging information war, and apart from that, occupation line is applying hard power, and the occupation line is moving deeper into Georgian sovereign territory. So we have families nearby the occupation line who go to bed like in Georgia and wake up on the territory which is controlled by Russia. And Georgian government prefers to keep it low-key. They may issue a statement, but that's it. But what worries me is not Georgian government, everything is clear with that. But attitude of some of our Western partners and Western sort of friends, who praise this low-key approach of Georgian government. And I have a feeling that there is a certain fatigue with this whole Georgia-Russia issue, and Georgia going there actively and knocking on their door, asking for help. So do you think we share my sort of fear or impression, or if not, how can you explain that attitude, praising the passive foreign policy regarding Georgia-Russia issue of the government from our Western friends and colleagues? Thank you.
Thank you. That was a clear question. Let's take one or two more, and then we will answer them. Yes, go ahead.
First of all, thank you very much for all panelists for incredible presentations. My name is Dimitar Shpata, I represent International Medicine University. We discussed too much about the Russian domestic ambitions, etc., etc. So clearly in this regard, taking into consideration that this panel was dedicated to threats and how to prevent them. My question is related to the demography, because I think that it's one of the most difficult issues taken into consideration, that each year the number of population in the world is increasing for about 85 million people, and about 90% of this growth is coming from the share of the population in the global south countries. For example, in the beginning of the 20th century, the share of Europe was coming about 25% of the global population. As of the year of 2011, only 11% is coming from...
Yeah, that's clear. So what's the question?
The question is about it creates a convenient base for increasing the legal immigration, for example, in the countries of Europe, United States of America, etc., etc. Taking into consideration this problem related to the demographic situation, how to prevent, for example, this type of threat, taking into consideration the number of refugees now they are coming in, especially in the southern part of Europe, but this process can be continued in the future, taking into consideration if this demographic situation is a lot in the change in favor of the...
Yeah. Thank you. And the last one? Okay. Yes, go ahead.
Ian Bolton from the Centre for European Reform in London. If we're looking at threats, I'm slightly surprised that nobody has talked about the internal threats to the West. One of the most insidious effects of Russia's information warfare is not actually to promote Russia as a great model, but to say everywhere else in the world is just as bad. And that is one of the things which is contributing to the rise of populism and a general disillusionment in traditional democratic institutions. So I'd be interested to hear from any of the panelists really what they think we can do to re-energize support for democracy within the West and the traditional heartland of democracy.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it was partly answered already by those who said that we should stop this self-defeating, self-flagellating mood in the West, and probably be more proud of being a part of the free world and being proud about our values. Surprisingly, you may hear few European politicians mentioning in the connection to the migration issue that those people are not necessarily going only for economic benefits, but they want to live in a world, in a society which is free and free of threats which are in other societies. It's interestingly absent from the discourse, this kind of, this is the result of our success, and not only economic success, but also success of our way of life. But there was one specific question to you, and then if anyone wants to comment on these questions, please go ahead. We have something like 5 minutes to wrap up.
Well, thank you. Well, responding to the question about to have or not to have a line, I think this is exactly the biggest similarity between Lithuanians and Georgians. You know, some people call us Italians of the Baltics or Georgians of the North. You know, we always had a line, always. And it was always criticized by majority. We've been always feeling kind of alone. When we declared independence in Soviet Union, being the first, we've been receiving letters from Mitterrand and Chancellor Kohl, don't do it, please. We never abandoned it. When with late President Kaczynski, we've been blocking post-PCA talks with Russia because we saw clearly that Putin is destroying democracy, and we cannot enter in relations with this dictator because he will destroy us all, afterwards. Nobody actually believed us. When I was standing alone in Brussels like Deputy Foreign Minister, looking to all the eyes of, a lot of colleagues, European colleagues saying you should never, let Russia go because they will actually attack Saddam it will be Crimea next in 2008. Nobody believed us. So, you know, from little Lithuanian experience, always have a line, fight for little commas, fight for little meters, because if you will not fight, nobody will fight for you.
Yeah, I very much agree with that, because for a small country, our power is not only our negotiating power, and we necessarily don't have armed forces to back it up. Our power is the public opinion, the NGOs, well, everything you can gather. That's why you should do it in the open. I mean, if you are a superpower, you can afford perhaps negotiating in the smoke-filled rooms and hope that this somehow brings you to a better conclusion. That necessarily doesn't happen, but for a small country, that is really the best way. Two other quick points. One about the demography. I won't go to the demographic details, but I would say that the present migration crisis, I think we are focusing too much on the most dramatic part of it. We should also look what we can do about the root causes. And I mean, solving the civil war in Syria, it's just a sentence. We are not able to do that at the moment. But what we are able to do is to support refugee camps, huge refugee camps in Turkey, in Lebanon, in Jordan, and creating a situation whereby at least people in those camps are not doing everything possible to leave the camps and rush to Europe. I am talking about humanitarian aid, I'm talking about food, I'm talking about all other opportunities, other things we can deliver. And finally, about the sort of the level of I'm sorry, what was yes, sorry. The last question, what was connected with the ultra-left and ultra-right movements in Europe. That is a serious issue. And Russian politicians, particularly Putin, does a lot to support the ultra-right and the ultra-left. It's not important for him, either this or that. Something which breaks, so to say, the cohesion of the democratic West and the democratic governments. And we should discuss this issue because this is not an easy issue. I see in my own country that ministers come out of the very nice offices in Brussels. They go to the microphones and they say, we, European Union, has decided that we have to do this. And people see them in the TV programs only sort of talking in Brussels, if you will. And that creates a feeling that something is not right with democracy. I mean, I don't think this is a real problem, but as a perception, this has to be taken into account. Sorry.
Thank you. Just a word on vision. You mentioned a lack of vision. I think the vision is there. It has not changed. The vision is to have stable democratic neighborhood around Europe. And I would wonder if the new strategy would change anything about that, even if we were not successful compared to the 2003 strategy. But we will stick to this vision. And we will have to adjust our tools, but not the vision. The vision will remain the same. And I would argue that the soft power of the EU, despite the problem you rightly described also as internal problem with ways of populism, it's a success story. It's not only the migrants who are coming, but this is also exactly our friends and partners in the Eastern Partnership countries who decided, some of them, as sovereign states and populations that would like to go this direction. This is also a success story. And still, of the EU, and still, even if there are economic problems, nobody denies them, it is 7% of the global population, which still produces 23% of global output. It's there. I would agree that we are not the best in transmitting that message, and the idea of the discussion leading to the new strategy, which would be ideally adopted in June next year, is to have a broad outreach in the EU member states and in some outside the EU, exactly to talk also to the broader audience, because the threats we were talking about, there is a realization of them by the politicians, but not necessarily by the societies. You know that selling foreign policy is not the easiest thing. So to try to talk to the public is also a way of preparing ground for a more coherent foreign action. And on demography, I fully agree. Nigeria will surpass United States in some years to come in terms of population. Just to give you an example, it is a huge challenge, but there are cultural elements linked to it. It's extremely difficult to discuss demographic questions, but I think that with the upcoming conference on the sustainable goals, the new Millennium Development Goals, the discussion will be put on the agenda, and there will be a try to cope with this, but it's not the EU which can tell anybody, for the fact that this is also within the EU a national prerogative. So we cannot preach. We can have programs and discuss, but not as mentors or preachers.
David.
Very quick comment on a propaganda question. So basically that, I mean, in general, there are two major propaganda lines here in Georgia of Russian propaganda lines. The one line is that the West is all about the minority rights, and then this propaganda line is filled up with a lot of religious and the nationalistic rhetorics and so on. But this is not the most the dangerous line. The second line the Russian propaganda pursues is that the West may be the good thing, but they would never accept us. They would never accept Georgia as an equal, as a part of it, and the enablers of this propaganda line are the actions. By the way, it's not the you can't counter this propaganda with the counter propaganda. How much? It's been 7 years since Bucharest summit. Heads of states and governments took the decision that Georgia and Ukraine will become NATO member, but they failed to grant the technical mechanism of membership. It's been 7 years, and how long? It's been a year and a half since Russians attacked Ukraine. And then those talks about providing the defense assistance. And nobody is trying to explain it, practically unexplainable. Why Georgia is not granted map, why Ukraine is not granted the defensive, the defense assistance. Well, I think that we are coming down to the issue that there is no vision for future. How do we see this? Eastern.
Let's please sit down. We are the last panel of the day, but we have shade, and we promise to keep it lively. Okay, good early evening, all of you. I'm Donald Jensen, Senior Fellow for the Center for Transatlantic Relations here in Washington, D.C. It's a great pleasure to moderate this panel called The Special Case of Ukraine, but I think it's called special, of course, because it is, but because it has so many lessons and is worth examining and discussing on its own. It's my great pleasure to introduce our distinguished guests today. To my immediate left, Mr. Georgi Borkeliya, Secretary of Foreign Affairs for the National Movement here in Georgia. Mustafa Naim, a member of the Rada in Kiev from the Poroshenko Party. Third, Andres Pidogovits from Latvia, where he is the Foreign Ministry State Secretary for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And finally, Vladimir Kolob, also from the Poroshenko Party. A lot to talk about. Let's go through our guests one by one. Let's start at the far end, sir. Mr. Kolob.
Thank you very much. It's really proud for me to be among these great people, prominent, distinguished people with this terrific audience. Well, I do appreciate this invitation. You know, we've spoken a lot today about the geopolitical position of Ukraine in these affairs of current Russian aggression of my country. But what happened now recently in Ukraine, in Kiev, and which is great. I think that, for example, recently we have adopted new military doctrine, where we, for the first time during our independence, name the things as we should name. When we name the Russian war threat and now the Russian war threat, and not trying to omit this question. Also, what happened, I think, what is the benefit now for Ukraine and what happened now with the people of my country is now the overwhelming majority of my country is absolutely pro-European integration. And moreover, for the first time during Ukrainian independence, the data shows, the recent polling shows that for the first time that people are pro-Euro-Atlantic integration. So it's a bit more than 50% these are ready to accept the NATO integration. And this is great thing that's currently happening in Ukraine. However, I would like to emphasize one thing, that I do believe and I hope that our European friends and partners should remember all time speaking to Russian Federation, to Putin, that Ukraine currently fighting not only for our territorial integrity and our sovereignty, but also we are defending eastern border of Europe. And this is very, very crucial that we need to underline all time to Putin and to Russia Federation. So this is what I would try to be, well, I tried to be sure that I would like to leave the time for the floor to raise the question, but this is the points that are currently happening in Ukraine. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
I would like to start by thanking the organizers of this conference and express profound appreciation for this very warm welcome. Georgia and Arizona, warm welcome is really appreciated. A lot of right points have been mentioned already about the situation in Georgia, in Ukraine. I don't particularly like the term frontline states, but certainly this conference is very important. The timing is very crucial. And it's very important that the discussion is not solely focused only on Georgia. I'm very happy that Ukraine is included, and Moldova has been mentioned a few times, and I would think that even other neighbors of yours, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Belarus, should be debated as well. Because when we look at the debate within the European Union, within NATO, this should be a really broad discussion, not solely focused in the selfish terms on specific countries. Of course, Georgia is a host of the conference, but I think the bigger picture should not be forgotten if we are really talking about the whole European continent as we see it, free, peaceful, and democratic and prosperous. This is our vision, and I very much in line with my predecessors who spoke very eloquently about the common vision, but we should not forget that those ghosts of the past, this vision of the spheres of influence has not died. It hasn't died in Moscow, but it hasn't died in some intellectual circles, in some political circles in Europe as well. So I think this comprehensive discussion is very important. When a lot of parallels have been made between the Baltics, Georgia, Ukraine before me, I think some of them accurate, some of them, of course, could not be copied in every situation. But when it comes to Ukraine, I think one of the comparisons with the Baltics is similar. In the 90s, when we just regained independence, we were told by our Western friends, you are brave, you are proud nations, but you have weak states. And I think this is still very much the fact which we have to recognize in the case of Ukraine. And indeed, we have to do utmost in this very difficult moment to support the Ukrainian state in nation building, in strengthening the governance, in fighting corruptions, in supporting decentralization, sharing best experiences. And in doing this, I think we should be less emotional. I think emotions have been a bit too much in some of the previous panels, but as dry, as practical, as concrete as possible. Because the evolution is in the details, and details matter. And maybe we don't have the grand strategy, grand vision right now, but at least we have some action plans. And I'm speaking as an outgoing EU presidency. We tried really hard within the last 6 months to focus the attention of European leaders on the situation in Eastern Partnership 6 countries. I know that this is not the perfect grouping. I know that we have agreed to do as specific programs, partnerships, as tailor-made programs in the coming couple of years with each partner. But my advice would be not to ruin the whole concept at this point. It might evolve gradually in a couple of years in something more profound, but don't think that immediate upgrades will happen in with Georgia or with Ukraine in the coming 6 or 12 months. It should be a gradual process. We have action plans. Every European Parliament except Greek has ratified DCFTA's association agreements. We have done it in record time, in 16, 18 months. This is fast for Europe, and I think it is important to keep this track. So I would think that engagement with the neighbors, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Belarus, even if it's very difficult, is a very, very important. DCFTA has been mentioned a few times. I think that it is one of the key for the success. And this agreement should not be compromised in Ukraine, in Georgia, in Moldova. And to many Europeans, success of DCFTA will be a litmus test, how we progress forward. Visa waiver with Georgia, Ukraine has been discussed. We very much hope that we will succeed by the end of the year. But again, this requires a lot of concerted effort by the governments, by the parliaments, by the civil society. And it's great that we have this conference here today in Tbilisi, but I want to share a little bit of personal frustration. during the Latvian presidency in the European Council. We organized more than a dozen of conferences in skeptical EU capitals. And I wish we could have more Germans and French and Italians and Spaniards in this audience today. And unfortunately, very often diplomats from Ukraine or diplomats from other Eastern Partnership countries were not active. They were not speaking out. They were not expressing their own vision of the developments. And I very much agree with what Speaker of the Parliament said in the morning, that education of your countries in Europe is still needed. Ignorance is profound. Sometimes it's an excuse, but many people outside, further east, further west of Berlin, have no clue what is Ukraine still. It sounds maybe too dramatic, but this is fact. At the best, many know that this is a swing state, but they have huge gaps of understanding. And in that sense, I think this gradual approach with gradual concrete steps, including visa liberalization by the end of the year, will make a difference. And therefore, I think funding for the defense is important, but funding and involvement of the best and brightest people in the Foreign Service in interagency dialogue is as crucial as possible. I represent the Latvian Foreign Service. I have worked for 22 years, and I'm the 4th Secretary General of the Foreign Service in 25 years. I think this is an indication how consistent has been the service. Ministers went and go, but civil service stayed, and diplomats stayed. And I agree with my predecessors talking about the moral imperative and important public relations and diplomatic skills. All those talents have to be involved and engaged in your foreign policy advocacy work. So I want to be with those who believe that we have a strategy. At least we have a plan how to go together. U.S. involvement is important, but it's very important to continue this work, and DCFTA visa waiver are the most concrete achievable goals for the coming months.
Thank you. Mustafa.
Thank you very much for invitation. Today many things was told about Ukraine. I will start from my own story. The thing is that I'm originally from Afghanistan, and my country was occupied when I was 8, and after that twice in my life I encountered the same situation. Second time it was Georgia. In 2008, as a journalist, I covered this conflict here, and I remember everything, every moment of that war. I remember how many hopes were in Georgian people on West partners. And the same thing I encountered in our parliament when as a parliamentarian. We faced this war, the occupation of Ukrainian territories. And what I've learned about these 3 wars, 2 things that will form the end of this war. One of it is how precise and decisive is leadership of our countries. That's why I'm a little bit disappointed by words I've heard today from leadership of Georgia, which were very soft about Russia. And we see many points of Georgian government about non-delivering Ukraine vital weapon from West. And it is very, very upset. We are upset about that. The second thing I think will finally solve this problem is that how we are united around reforms in our country. And you have 3 examples of that. Afghanistan was not united, they were not precise, they were not decisive, and you have the consequence we have. Georgian people, they were united in 2008, they wanted to make reforms, and now you're in free country, you have reforms, you have freedom of speech, and I think you will develop that. And we have Ukraine. We are going on in that way. We are united in our position and very precise and decisive in our voice about war. We know who are our enemies. We call them directly, publicly. We don't have any other point of view in our country, in those who are decision makers in our country. Who are enemy of Ukraine? This is Russia. It's not about, some rumors or about some talks. It's reality we see in our country every day. But unfortunately, we have different points of view on reforms. And I would like to talk today about that issues. And exactly in that issue, we need help from Western people. Mostly in foreign conferences, I've heard from our partners that what you need, maybe money. Yes, we need money. But much more than money, we need your efforts to push our government to be united around reforms. And it's very ridiculous sometimes when I heard from our foreign partners that, come on, Poroshenko is not doing reforms or Yatsenyuk not doing reforms, but you are financing them. I mean, this is reality. Ukraine now needs money of Western countries and institutions. And now the struggle we see in our country is among those who doesn't have will to make reforms and those who doesn't have experience to make reforms. Young people, young generation, we don't have experience. We don't know how to run country yet. We need some time, maybe 1 year, half a year, some of us months, and we will come to power. It's our destiny because it's our generation. We should take responsibility. But from the other side, every day have very high price. And our president and our prime minister, they're really better than we had before. It's true, but they have still the same sins of system which was developed after Soviet Union. So I would ask you today discuss about that, how we can help our president, our prime minister, speaker of parliament, governors also, to be united around one agenda of reforms, because actually you are financing that reforms. Thank you.
Thank you. George.
Sure. Thank you so much. I was told by organizers to be not too long because it was a long day and we want a bit more time for discussion, but I still want to spend just a minute to thank the organizers, and in particular the McCain Institute, for making this kind of event possible in Tbilisi. Senator McCain has been a long-lasting and huge friend of this country and of this region and sovereignty of our nations, and I see that as a continuation of this support, and we will be always extremely grateful. And I'm also very pleased to see many familiar faces, in particular the leadership of the Institute, also people who have been extremely helpful in the very difficult moments, so thank you for that. A special welcome for all of our Ukrainian friends, and to jump to the topic, I think regardless of other considerations, there is a consensus that the Ukrainian people deserve our whole attention and support for their heroic struggle. First, against their own dictatorial repressive government and the examples they showed us in Maidan, and now their struggle against near full-scale Russian invasion. So that by itself has an intrinsic value to be supported. But I think there is a growing consensus, at least I hope here, that what is being decided now in Ukraine is even much more than the fate of the Ukrainian people, as valuable as it is. I think we all now are coming close to agreement that the events in Ukraine in coming months and maybe a year will decide the fate of, in many ways, of this country. My country will have a huge impact on it, the whole region, and I would even agree with those who would argue that it will have a long-lasting impact on the whole Euro-Atlantic security architecture for short, mid, and maybe long term. So in a way it will determine what will happen with post-Cold War order. And I think we have some good news, we have some bad news. I think finally, after many years of misjudgment, Putin's words and his actions are taken more seriously than ever in the last 25 years. And we remember all that as early as in 2006, I believe, in Munich, he was very articulate about what was his real goal. Not Ukraine only, not its neighbors, not just like hurt feelings of the great empire, not concerns about Russian speakers, so-called, and all these false premises. He was very clear that he wanted to reverse the outcome of the Cold War he thinks, and he said as early as 2006 that the outcome of the Cold War was to the detriment of his country's interest, USSR, Russian Federation, and he wants to reverse those results, and he wants to destroy the architecture which existed. He wants US out of Europe. He wants Europe divided and pressured and divided into spheres of influence. So he was very clear, but nobody took it seriously. As I said, now we have a good news. Finally, it's taken more seriously than ever before. To continue with good news until I jump to the bad news, unfortunately, is that we have sanctions against Russia from EU, from US, from countries unthinkable maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, unfortunately. Good news. These sanctions are making Putin at least uncomfortable. The infantile strategy which existed in many European countries, even in US, that by engagement, economic engagement, and at least limited appeasement of so-called sensitivities, Russia will become an ally and it will become a real Western country, and so it's an uneasy partner. This strategy is, if not destroyed, but it's in tatters, so it's hugely damaged. It's also good news. Finally, we hear from leadership of the Pentagon the words which are very encouraging, that Russia is considered as a major, if not top threat for security of the United States. Again, a shift which is very welcome. Good news in Ukraine, despite all this amount of pressure, economic hardships, disastrous legacy of post-Soviet years in Yanukovych, and full-scale Russian military aggression and all those things, and infiltration of security structures before, Ukraine is standing and fighting. There is resilience to fight back, and as the speaker here noted, in public opinion mood, it consolidates the pro-Western Ukraine mood. It's now pro-NATO for the first time in many years. So those are all good news, giving us ground for optimism. But unfortunately, we have huge bad news too. As I said, the Putin threat is, and Kremlin threat is taken more seriously than ever. The strategy, the previous infantile strategy is over, but there is no new strategy, as it was noted here extensively, unfortunately. The Riga summit and the Wales summit of NATO, respectively, some good results, and I'll come back to that, but on fundamental issue of Ukraine, Georgia, and others, roadmap towards eventual NATO and EU membership, not quick, but eventual. There was no signal on the roadmap. The signal was, in that sense, negative. The Wales summit finally started to consider Russia as a military threat, and some encouraging steps by allies were made for contingency planning, but no clear message, as I said, on the membership and on non-NATO member countries. What's the strategy? Very welcome news of the training center in Tbilisi. Important, but not sufficient. No substitution for a vision, for final vision. Again, we hear still the statements, one famous statement, as some of you might remember in this country at least, that we can walk and chew the gum at the same time when it comes to Russia, that it's still an important partner on many other issues. It's also already mentioned the no delivery of weapons to Ukraine, defensive weapons, a very destabilizing step. It reduces the ability of Ukraine to resist Russian fighters. It sends a very dangerous geopolitical signal to everybody. So it's a political statement by itself. It reduces the cost for Putin, so it's part of lack of strategy. And finally, we hear alarming speculations about how Russia can use its bargaining chips in Syria. With a huge crisis of refugees in Europe, understanding how difficult it is for European democracies to cope with that, there is a logical consideration, as we hear from competent observers, to solve the Syria, or not solve, but like put it in some kind of order. And for that, Assad now looks irreplaceable, and for that, for engagement, Russia is needed. Again, I hope this speculation will never materialize, but unfortunately, our job is to assess the worst case scenarios. If that could happen, if again there will be a consideration that Russia is an important part of that solution, and if there is kind of relative stability of on the eastern front of Ukraine, there is talk that there can be a consideration of easing the sanctions. So, to continue with negative news, if that could happen, or even if there is a continued perception, and we all know perceptions sometimes are more important than facts, that the status quo of Russian action in not only in Crimea but in eastern Ukraine is accepted, and there is no longer fundamental confrontation, which we don't see now, that will have a devastating effect not only in Ukraine but in Georgia and elsewhere. I still believe that because of heroism of Ukrainian people, they will not surrender, but at least it will send the shock signals elsewhere. It will weaken the projection of Western power in the whole world. And again, I'll say the most unthinkable thing which have been mentioned. It was already said in 2008 when the Crimea was named as the next target. Many friends of ours thought it was unthinkable, unserious, it was fear-mongering. Now we know if Putin wins or partially wins this gambit now, he will continue to challenge the Article 5 country next. He will try. It's his goal. He will not stop. He never has stopped. So again, not to be all doom and gloom. Again, I think the resilience of Ukrainian people gives us hopes. And this difficult situation is also an opportunity to make Ukraine a place, together with all this region, where Putin and Kremlin will be defeated. But for that, there's a need of strategy, not just plans. And again, being as appreciative of all the support this country have received from US, from EU, from all our countries, especially our Eastern European friends which are here. Again, hate to sound ungrateful, we'll be always grateful for all this support. But I think we should all agree that the policy towards Russia in post-Cold War era was a failure. And recalling the famous joke, or not so joke, of Churchill about Americans, that we always must hope that there'll be a right thing done after all the other possibilities are exhausted, I think now it's a high time finally to have a right policy towards Russia, at the expense of the tragedy in Ukraine included. And I mean, if there are any bold historic examples coming to mind, there was a situation after World War II when President Truman took bold but very serious and well thought through pragmatic steps in building a NATO and moving into Turkey and Greece politically and engaging them in NATO when those countries were very unstable. And that policy, together with Truman Doctrine, contributed to a defeat at the end of the Cold War of Soviet Empire. And we are at the moment which will determine for decades the fate of millions of people. And this threat should be taken very seriously. There is no room for further mistakes when it comes to Russia, and Ukraine is a place where it must not happen. No more mistakes in Ukraine with respect to Russian aggression. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have two questions for our Ukrainian guests before we go to the audience, and you can divide them as you want. Mustafa, if you prefer the first one, the events, the explosions at the Rada this week, contributed to a perception of the Ukraine critics that radicalism was abroad, radicalism is increasing, and so forth. And relatedly, it would be the state of the coalition, if you could talk a little bit about that. And then Vladislav, if you could talk about the Minsk process, what both sides want, where there seems to be clearly people going in different directions. Thank you.
About situation and about events on the Rada. Let's be honest. In our country, we have war. It's not anti-terroristic operation, which is called by our government because they can't call it war, you know, from different circumstances, because if we call it war, we should stop all financing, everything. So this is war. And you had war in your country. You know what is that? This war started not officially. First months of our conflict on the east part of Ukraine, it was not controlled. This zone was not controlled. So many weapons we had in our peace side of Ukrainian territory. So yes, we had that problem. We had radical political parties. We had also very radical nationalistic parties. But if you compare the influence of those parties on political situation in Ukraine, for example, with the situation in France, you will see that they are zero in our country. They don't have places in our government. They don't have places in our parliament. They doesn't influence in civil society. And situation on the Rada and what happened showed that our society has very precise point of view who are they. Yes, we lost 3 soldiers who was fighting in our eastern front. But from the other side, this situation showed that Ukrainian society, Ukrainian people, media, journalists and activists and all politicians, they are united on one point. We can't use weapon in peace side of our country. All people in Ukraine, all media, all politicians, all businessmen, they condemned that situation and that political party which was involved in that. And now you know that prosecutors and Minister of Interior, they're working on that criminal case against those people who did it. So this is not start of radicalization in situation in Ukraine. But I would like to remember you that we have this war during 1 year. And through all this year, we didn't have any situation like that. We had some problem with radicals, we had some problem with the radical powers, but this is not something that, forming our framework in our country. The consequence of that situation, first of all, we had problem in coalition. It's true that one of the members of our coalition, they left the majority in parliament, but we still have this majority, and this majority consists of two parties, who is President Party and Prime Minister Party. So this small party, they will cause some problem for us because they're very active in media, and actually they united around them oligarchs. And I hope that our President and Prime Minister finally, they will form the strategy and will call the enemies of reforms in our country. Unfortunately, we don't know them. Who is against reforms in Ukraine? I know who is for reforms. Okay, they call them that they're for reforms. The President, Prime Minister, Parliament, some politicians, but they don't call name of those oligarchs just because many of them linked with them. This war, which started from that day in the Parliament, which started in media and political field, will show, are our President, Prime Minister, Speaker of Parliament, are they really ready to fight for reforms, or they are linked to their past so tight that they will not survive in this war? Because next step will be very, very deep crisis in Ukrainian political life, not only financial life. So I think and I hope that our President will very conscious about that. I hope so.
Thank you. And Vladislav on the Minsk status.
Thank you. As we might know, well, all of us might know that Minsk agreements are enforced till the end of this year. And everybody now thinks about whether Ukraine has a, let's say, plan B or something like that. I think that it will depend on the scenario how the Putin will behave. Because I can view several scenarios here. For example, if Putin go for the, let's say, all-means war, with the boots on, well, there are Russian boots on our soil, but with the all-regular army attack my country, so I'm pretty sure that my country, Ukraine, has not maybe all means, but enough means to face this challenge of Russian war, with the great support of our European and American friends. But I think that we can face. Another scenario that could happen is one thing that I would like to mention, that Ukraine obey all of the provisions of Minsk agreement. However, terrorist groups, LNR and DNR, as well as Russian Federation, do not do it. Well, they do not implement any provision of Minsk agreement, any. I would like to underline this. And Ukraine at least tries to implement them. Another scenario what could happen after the Minsk agreement, that Putin will try to freeze this conflict like in Pridnestrovia case. And this is also quite a challenge for Ukraine, because we would need to reintegrate these territories. We will need to convince that people who live in currently occupied territories of Ukraine, as Crimea and several regions of Donetsk and Lugansk, that we should be reintegrated in the one country. But we will succeed, absolutely agree with my colleague Mustafa, that if we will provide reforms in my country. If Ukraine will show that we are strong enough to provide reforms, we will reintegrate automatically these these territories, because they will see that, okay, Ukraine has a willing and they do reforms in country, and that's why they will reintegrate to us. So I think that the main challenge that Ukraine will face after the Minsk agreements, I don't know whether it will be another agreement, Minsk or any other agreement, but what we absolutely need to do, of course with the support of our friends, the reforms in every domain of Ukrainians, in Ukraine's life. Economic reforms, legal enforcement reforms, prosecution reforms, military reforms, any reforms, we need to do it. Otherwise, we will face not only external crisis that happen now in the eastern part of Ukraine, but also, and it will be more dangerous for Ukraine and the whole country, the internal crisis.
Thank you. We have about 20 minutes for questions. There are 2 microphones there. And please give your name when you step up. Thank you.
Okay. I have one question to both of you, Ukrainian colleagues and Georgia. When I visit the Ministry of Defense in Kiev, the National Security Council in Kiev, I meet always experts from Georgia, so this is a good contribution of Georgian experts to Ukrainian security policy. But of course, we are aware that the contribution of the West, also of my country, Poland, to the security of Ukraine is very weak. There is a coalition of countries that contribute more, and there is a coalition of countries that don't contribute anything. What are the instruments, what are the tools that could be used by let's say, those who are in favor of supporting Ukraine, better tools, better instruments to convince those who are not convinced in the West, for example, the inner circle of President Obama, that was against, let's say, the common view of both Republicans and Democrats in the Congress at the beginning of spring this year, to transfer, deliver weaponry to Ukraine, to convince those 5% from the inner circle of President Obama to move ahead.
Thank you, Mustafa. Are there 5? Is it that many?
I have a follow-up question on the implementation of the Minsk agreement. I guess one of the scenarios that we haven't talked about, and the reflection of our Ukrainian friends have been very interesting, is something that Igor mentioned in his introduction. We hear already during these days too much talk about positive implementation of Minsk agreements, too much talk about that, with a very sensitive stabilization perhaps that is happening. The French president went as far as declaring today that he's very satisfied with the way how implementation happens, and Paris could be the country that could advocate if the Minsk agreement will be fully implemented for lifting the sanctions that are imposed against Russia, without specifying what he meant by the sanctions, without not including these vision sanctions that are Crimean related as well. So my question is how that is reflected in Ukraine when we have a situation where we have very fragile implementation of Minsk agreement. And by the way, it's not that Minsk agreement expires after the end of 2015, it's whether or not it is being implemented as it is prescribed to be implemented. And if not, who will be held responsible for non-implementation, and what will be the political ramifications of that? So in this scenario, when end of 2015 is closer in terms of the time frame, we see Ukraine is being pressured to go ahead with the very sensitive issue of decentralization. We hear the big capitals of the Western Europe are talking about the possibility of lifting sanctions. Even in imaginary scenario of any positive implementation of, in a sustainable way also, of the Minsk agreement. So how is this reflected in Ukraine, which is in a very fragile situation as of now? The cooking up of any deal that can go behind the interests of Ukraine. Do you see Ukrainian society can accept that, or Ukraine can backfire if that happens? And if you think that Western powers are really appreciative of the fact that acceptance of appeasement to the way how the de facto control of Russia and taking framed like hostage, basically, if that happens, will be acceptable at all by the Ukrainian society, even if that can be pressured upon the political elite of Ukraine.
Thank you. Mustafa, you had the first question, second question.
About contribution of Georgians and our Western partners. Georgian people not only contributed, not only experts in our Ministry of Defense, but also President. So we thank you for Mrs. Saakashvili to our economy, actually, and our public political life, and also, and even more, for Ekas Guladze. About Western countries and contribution of them, I think the biggest problem is that all Western countries, and we should be frank with that, the strategy of Western countries is to satisfy Putin. Everything they are doing is just satisfy him, to make him calm down, not to defeat him. It's not something about fight. Listen why and what they are telling us. First of all, in 1994, we agreed to demolish all our nuclear power, 2,000 missiles. 2,000 missiles, nuclear missiles. Because Western countries asked us. They didn't have war, just asked us, please do that because it is a very good idea for the world. And now we can't even ask them to give us one gun. It's ridiculous. And they are guarantees of our sovereignty and integrity. United States, Great Britain, and why? How our leadership can prove to our people that Western countries really want to help us, but not to deal with Putin. It is very, very hard and difficult. And Western countries now putting Mr. Poroshenko in very dangerous situation. Because just imagine that we really did adopt this constitution, and Putin didn't stop. He's going further and captured some city. What people will say to our president? That he betrayed him. And why Poroshenko now is doing that? Do you know the real and the most important argument of Mr. Poroshenko in parliament why we should adopt this constitution? Not because of Putin, not because of war, but because of Merkel and Hollande. Because they asked us to do that. Because this is the guarantee that West will help us. But what help we need? Money? Yes, we need money. But we should defend our country. We should defend our territory. All success of our president and our country depends on those guys who are now dying on the front line. It's not about reformers. Just imagine that we don't have army. And Putin didn't stop in Donetsk, and now he's in Kharkiv. But what reforms we can talk about? And now the president, chief of commander should come to the front line and say to them, you died. We'll 6,000 people. But we should have this compromise. Just because we need reforms, and we should put this option of status of Donbass and Lugansk regions in our constitution. It's very dangerous. Next step, we'll have a very big problem of Mr. Poroshenko on front line and our prime minister too. And that is the consequence of very soft, not precise position of Western countries. Sanctions is very good, but sanctions doesn't stop people's corpse to our cities. It is very hard to explain to mother of soldier who died that, we should wait 5 years till Russia will be defeated because they will not have money. Because Western countries put them some sanctions. It's very difficult. So my advice to Western countries, what to do and how to, just imagine what can happen. Look at Greece. I'm not talking about economy. I know maybe it's not tactic, maybe it's not good comparison, but Greece really is member of European Union. But if you compare the help and the resources, financial resources that was provided to Greece and to Ukraine you will see that the Greece received $250 billion. We received $25 billion. And you know that Greece government is pro-Russian. They are not pro-European. Our people are dying with the flag of European Union, not only Ukrainian flag. And now our people really support European direction of our country and leadership. But this is today. Just imagine that next election, local or parliament election in our country, and the leadership of our country will change. It will be very easy to convince those mothers, brothers, and children who lost their relatives that Europe didn't help us, that it is much more easier to deal with Russia, to receive some resources from Russia. We had that in 2013 when Mr. Yanukovych received loan from Putin. Would we like to repeat this way? And we are going toward that way. Just because it is very hard now to convince our people that Western countries are our partners not only for money, but also for war. So my idea is just to repeat that to Western politicians, just please, this is not end of time. Yes, we did something 2 years ago. We won that fight on our Maidan, but it was our victory. It's not victory of Western politicians. But the same way we can lose in the future without that support in our front line.
I think that Mustafa already answered somehow to your second question, but for me personally, I was really frustrated to hear the news that Olan said that the sanctions could be lifted, because the problem is that if Putin feels that the sanctions soften a little bit, even that the sanction will soften a little bit, he will immediately move forward, understanding that he could cope with this, so that Europe and could lift the sanction on him. That's why I was talking all the time that we already read this question this morning, that, for example, I do believe that we really need support, not only, as Mustafa said, on money, but we really need weapons from our friends, because we really need to fight for Ukraine and for the European Union, because we fight not for only my country, as I already told, we fight for the European Union, because I'm pretty sure that Putin, if we will succeed in Ukraine, he will not stop in Ukraine. He will continue in Georgia, might be, hopefully not. He will continue maybe in Baltic state, hopefully not. But we fight for our country, and we fight for the European Union.
Sir. To be again very brief, I'm in no position to evaluate the challenges with reforms in Ukraine, but I can say based on our experiences that if there would be a clear message of the roadmap towards EU membership or NATO membership, the security assistance, that would be an additional and effective leverage in domestic debates with respect of painful decisions to be made. But the absence of that is not helping the reform agenda domestically. But again, I was myself very alarmist, and I think legitimately so, in my intervention, and quite frustrated with lack of strategy, as I said. But on the other hand, I want to shortly address, based on Minister Klick's question, on what should we do to convince President Obama or somebody else. Again, I'm in no position to have any competent answer on that. But what I can say for sure is what we shouldn't do. And here I would even slightly disagree with Mr. Sikharulidze, who was speaking here, saying that it is an unsolvable propaganda issue that West doesn't want us. I think that attitude is dangerous, and that's what sometimes our government officials off the record say. What we shouldn't do is we shouldn't contribute to this difficult situation by a
not only defeatist but completely politically schizophrenic strategy that our current government has. I mean, declared concept of the current ruling coalition was that Georgia should not be a problematic issue in a relationship between West and Russia. That's not my interpretation. That's a written manifesto that they issued, and they've been more or less implementing this. We should not pretend that there is a progress where there is no progress, like in our relationship with Russia, and we should not boast that we have followed the advices of some of our misguided good friends that engagement and cultural dialogue will bring us progress with Russia, and that by pretending that there is no problem, by not shouting about the problems, this is a solution. This is the strategy, at best, which our government has taken, and this has brought us to a very dangerous situation when we are losing now in this psychological warfare. So we can't just say that our legitimate or semi-legitimate frustration with lack of strategy justifies our inaction. Unlike Ukraine, we in Georgia now have a leadership who has no clear vision and beliefs on that, and that's very dangerous. For 2 years, there has been not a single bilateral trip by Georgian PM or foreign minister to Ukraine. This is a political statement, in addition to a scandalous and morally and pragmatically disastrous position of our prime minister with respect of security assistance to Ukraine when he said that he's against that. So we shouldn't prosecute pro-Western opposition. We shouldn't support financially or politically Eurasianist groups, which is happening now. And we shouldn't repeat every day to our nation that, well, and I will quote now the leadership of Georgia, that, well, if you don't want our policy with Russia, do you want to be like Ukraine? Do you want your children to be bathing in blood? This is, of course, I mean, this is a powerful message, a very dangerous one, because that reinforces the position that we are doomed if we confront Russia, and that somehow implies that Russian, Ukrainian people or leadership is at fault. So there is some other policy which can drive us through this safely. And that's something which our good friends in West want to hear, but this will not bring any good result. So again, I think we should push. I think we should not be deterred by the delays in good strategy against Russia. We should do our homework. I hate the word homework, but our homework is not to give up even as we see the obstacles that we see. And Ukrainians are giving us example of that in a very difficult situation.
Thank you. We have about 10 more minutes for questions. Sir?
Thank you very much. My name is Dr. Pelvia. I'm an international fellow in the Mackay Institute, and now I represent Vatican Council. First of all, I would be happy to know what it's really very sad to see that the Ukrainian partner will have no representation in the European government. It's really sad to see.
For repeated times now, not only this conference.
So I have one comment to my Ukrainian friend and one question. My comment is that with the limited engagement in different occasions in Ukraine, my observation is sometimes the reformist-minded people, the young generation, or the current representatives of the executive branch speak of the reforms. They need more people with management rather than the political process. So reforms are the political process, and unfortunately I see less political process and more attempt to improve the management of the current system. And this is a misleading way. So my suggestion would be to concentrate on steaming up and charging the political process of the reform. And my opinion was realized what I see in the Ministry of Defense and the reform institutional management. I'm not thinking of the military particular side that you guys will find. And my next question, is about having this conference, and the idea is that we have made similarities and how we can combine our efforts, because we know going in Ukraine is a fight for the European future. So how the civil society in Europe, how the people who have close relations with different circles in Europe, United States, can help you to achieve your goals. I understand your emotions, but I think now it's not time to capitalize on your emotions, but rather in a pragmatic way ahead. So I would appreciate your thoughts, how we can look forward, and we as well, the European society, can contribute to help achieve our own joint goals. And on emotional note, after my job, I personally think that there is no way that this process of Ukraine is priority, and Ukraine finally will achieve its goal. So I thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your readiness to help us, and we really need that. Because first of all, it's not only about emotions, about political process, not only about management of current system. Many things in Ukraine changed after Maidan, not because we changed legislation, just because we changed perception of people of many traditional things. For example, 2 years ago, it was very easy to see how some public servants has very big house or very rich car, president or prime minister. It was something traditional. Today, we have problem with that. I mean, they have problem with that. So, and people doesn't allow public servants to show their richness. Yes, this is the particular things that changed. What else changed? And it is very strong point. Ukraine, I would say, is first country after Georgia, maybe, but I'm not sure. No, even Georgia didn't have that experience. We changed the Soviet Union tradition when people afraid of government. You had the same situation during Saakashvili. You know that, even that time. Yes? In our country, if you compare what we had in Russia or in Belarus, or in Georgia in Saakashvili time even, now government afraid of people. They're really afraid. You even can't imagine how afraid they today, every day, they try to satisfy people. They try to be kind. They try to like people. That's the problem. Other problem is that they can't be radical in that. And that is point we need your contribution. How to be radical in changes. Not killing speech, freedom of speech and freedom of media. This is very hard. Because now the problem we see in our government, in our leadership is that all authorities, they really think that if they will be dictators, they will change everything. But we had this experience in your country, in other countries, so we don't want that. But how to be radical in that situation when you have war and you need freedom of speech? Because for me, as a former journalist, it's obvious that freedom of speech and freedom of media is basic. It's the thing that will change everything. If you make some mistakes in the future, only freedom of speech and media will change it, will fix it. Not managers, not Western countries, only freedom of media. So we need that contribution. It's first. The second, what we need, that it is very difficult in Ukraine to rise for new politicians, young politicians. Very difficult. Why? First of all, because unfortunately our political life is oligarchized. Yes, oligarchs. They have monopoly on political life. We now only adopted in the first step of adoption of law about budget financing of political parties. But I don't think we will do it till next parliament election. So we'll have next parliament election with the same, same company. I mean, the Poroshenko party, Yatsenyuk, Tymoshenko, etc. Because we don't have this legislation. We need that experience, if you have it. The other thing we need, the biggest threat for Ukraine reforms I see now, is that we have many young people who works in different agencies, and I am really happy that I'm living in that time of our history, because many people works just before ambitions, mostly for free. They don't have money. The salary for public servants is very, very low. Very low. Unfortunately, our government, Prime Minister, let's be frank, President, all of them, they afraid to make public servants free. What happened in Georgia? You allowed public servants to have money from foundations, from different international institutions, yes? They were paid by different governments, different institutions. Our president and prime minister, they don't want to do that. I can describe my situation. When I was a journalist, I was earning more than $1,000 per month. Now my salary is $200. It is very hard to survive in Kiev, just believe me. Yeah, and I know, when I ask my president and ask the prime minister and leader of our fraction to do something with that, there are two arguments. First of all, it's not popular, because people will not accept that if you ask some money for public servants. And if you say them that, okay, we don't need this money from budget, let's have some foundations. Many institutions in the world will accept that, will bring this money, will pay to public servants just to make these reforms. And they don't want to change this legislation because of one reason. They don't need freedom for public servants. That's the problem. So we need your cooperation in that. Come to Ukraine and help us with that. Thank you.
Well, I absolutely agree with you that unfortunately reforms are facing up the struggle against the system. But the problem with that the system, well, political system and all that has been built for 24 years before we, for example, young people, come to the parliament. And this system is built by oligarchs, supported by all means, media, finance, political, and they're comfortable in this with this system, and it's very, very difficult to change it. And here is the question of the thresholds of radicalism became that how radical we should be in this reform. For example, I would like to mention, well, for me as a lawyer, I think that one of the major reforms that Ukraine needs is the judicial reform, because we can be successful in freedom of speech, we can be successful in any other reform, but at the end of the day, we will be ended up in the court. And unfortunately, the system, judicial system of Ukraine for 24 years was so corrupted, and they so linked to each other, even the judges doesn't know each other, but they are so linked to each other that it's very difficult to reform them externally. They struggle with it, and I really do believe that we need to, first reform that we need to do it in Ukraine is the judicial reform. Otherwise, we will fail all other reforms. However, for example, Mustafa is sorry for disclosing this, is currently dealing very close to the law enforcement reform and police reform. And we are quite successful, I think, in this domain. But unfortunately, when the police try to enforce the law, at the end of the day, courts or judges are so corrupted that they trigger the police reform, and this afraids me a lot. Thank you.
Well, unfortunately, we are at the end of the day. And let's thank our hosts, and this can be continued over dinner.
Sure, of course.
And I hope it will be. I just couldn't get the questions in, so thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be breaking up now. We'll be departing at 6:30 for the reception at the Presidential Palace. And then tomorrow we will be resuming here in the morning. We also will be circulating some recommendations for action we'll be seeking your input on. So 6:30 in the lobby to depart for the Presidential Palace. Thank you. I'm sorry, departure is going to be at 6:15, not at 6:30. So if we could move promptly to the lobby for a 6:15 departure. Thank you.